They said nature doesn't need permission to exist, but my HOA thought otherwise. It started with a letter slipped under my gate, stamped with authority and arrogance, demanding the removal of the century-old oak trees that stood guard over my family's farm for generations. They called it aesthetic violation. I called it madness. But I had no idea that this single demand would spiral into a war that would test my patience, my sanity, and everything I thought I owned. This is the story of how an HOA tried to erase history in the name of progress, and how one homeowner refused to let them win. Before we begin, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell so you never miss another true HOA nightmare. Trust me, you won't believe how this one ends. It began one cool morning in early spring when the first notice arrived. The farm had stood there for over 100 years, passed down through my grandfather's hands, its soil rich and dark, its oak trees tall and unwavering. They weren't just trees, they were history itself. Each one planted to mark a milestone: births, harvests, marriages. And now, the HOA board, newly formed after suburban expansion crept near our boundary, decided my trees didn't fit the neighborhood's vision. The words made me laugh at first. My nearest neighbor was a quarter-mile away, but the HOA had recently extended their jurisdiction, swallowing older lands like mine into their shiny grid of regulations. The first letter was polite, almost rehearsed, but the second one came with threats of fines and mandatory compliance. They demanded that the trees be removed within 30 days to ensure visual harmony. My stomach tightened as I read it. Those trees were more than part of the landscape. They were living memory. But the HOA didn't care about roots, only rules. So I decided to ignore them, thinking reason would prevail. I was wrong. Within 2 weeks, I began noticing cars idling near the property line. HOA inspectors with cameras took photos from their SUVs. I saw one man step into the field and measure something with a laser tool before hurrying back into his car. My mail filled with reminders and warnings, the language growing harsher each time. They claimed the trees posed a safety hazard and were potentially diseased. None of it was true. When I contacted a certified arborist, his report confirmed the trees were perfectly healthy. I sent the document to the HOA. They ignored it. The next notice arrived in red ink. Final warning. They planned to hire a contractor to remove the trees at my expense. That night I couldn't sleep. The wind rustled the leaves outside, whispering through the branches like old friends trying to calm me. I made a promise to those trees that night. I wouldn't let anyone cut them down. I contacted a lawyer, a local man who knew the ways HOAs twisted rules. He told me they were overstepping their authority. They can't enforce regulations retroactively, he said. Those trees were here long before the HOA even existed. I felt a glimmer of hope. We filed a formal complaint. But just as I began to breathe again, a bulldozer appeared one morning at the edge of my property. They had come without warning. The engine roared to life and I ran out to block the path. My hands shook, my voice hoarse from shouting. The workers hesitated, confused by the paperwork I waved at them. The HOA representative, a woman named Brenda, arrived moments later, her heels clicking like hammers. She smiled, cold and practiced, claiming they had emergency authorization. The lawyer arrived shortly after, forcing them to halt operations until the court hearing. For the first time, I saw fear flicker behind Brenda's smile. But she wasn't finished. Chapter 2 began with retaliation. They couldn't cut down the trees, so they decided to make my life unbearable. Within days, I received new violations, one after another. My barn was non-compliant, my fence too rustic. Even the rooster was considered a disturbance to the community. It was absurd. But absurdity was their weapon. They wanted to break me financially, to make me surrender the trees in exchange for peace. I started noticing small changes around the property. Someone slashed my fence one night. My mailbox disappeared. A strange chemical smell lingered near the base of one of the oaks. Someone had poured something into the soil. I called the sheriff, but he shrugged, saying it was a civil matter. The HOA wasn't afraid of me. They were afraid of losing control. I decided to fight back the only way I could: documentation. I installed cameras around the property, recorded every inspection, every violation notice. I even captured Brenda walking through my gate uninvited, clipboard in hand, snapping photos. That footage became my weapon. The court hearing approached, and my lawyer built the case carefully, citing state law, property boundaries, and the HOA's lack of jurisdiction over pre-existing agricultural land. Still, Still, the HOA tried to stall. They filed motion after motion, draining my time and patience. By summer, the trees began showing signs of stress from whatever they'd done to the soil. Their leaves turned yellow too early and sap oozed from the bark. I felt sick watching it. It wasn't just about property anymore. It was about life being destroyed by bureaucracy. One night, I found footprints near the largest oak, fresh mud leading to a pile of dead roots. Someone had tried to dig at its base. I realized then this wasn't just a fight over trees, it was a vendetta. The HOA wanted to make an example out of me. They wanted to remind everyone that no one stood above their rules. But I wasn't giving up. My lawyer found something big. The HOA's emergency authorization came from a fake permit number. It didn't exist in county records. They had forged documents to intimidate me. That discovery changed everything. When the hearing finally began, I handed over everything. The arborist's report, the fake permit, the footage of Brenda trespassing. The judge's expression hardened as he read through the files. The HOA's attorney tried to spin it as a misunderstanding, but the evidence was too solid. When court adjourned, I walked out feeling a small victory in my chest. Still, I knew this wasn't over. HOAs rarely admit defeat. They retaliate quietly, strategically. Chapter 3 began with silence. Weeks passed without letters or visits. The trees recovered slowly, their leaves darkening again. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to rest. But silence can be deceiving. Late one evening, I returned home from the feed store to find tire tracks leading through my gate and deep into the field. My heart stopped when I saw it. One of the smaller oaks was gone. In its place was a gaping hole, fresh sawdust scattered like ashes. They had done it while I was gone. My hands trembled as I called the sheriff again, but once more he called it a civil issue. I sent the footage from my cameras to my lawyer. The plates were visible, and the truck was registered to a landscaping company contracted by, of course, the HOA. It became criminal this time. My lawyer filed charges for trespassing and property destruction. Brenda went silent for days after, then posted a long statement online accusing me of obstructing community safety improvements. The comments section exploded. Neighbors took sides. Some called me stubborn, others called me brave. The story spread beyond the county. People started driving by to see the farm that fought the HOA. News outlets picked it up. Cameras appeared at my fence line, and suddenly the HOA wasn't just fighting me, they were fighting public opinion. Pressure mounted fast. The county commissioner got involved, citing the HOA for unauthorized property interference. Brenda resigned quietly 2 weeks later. But the damage lingered. The missing oak left an empty scar in the earth, a wound that wouldn't heal. I planted a new sapling in its place, a descendant of the same tree line, promising it would grow taller than any HOA rule. But just when I thought the battle was over, I discovered something worse. A new board had formed, led by one of Brenda's allies, and they were drafting a new policy that would require all properties under HOA jurisdiction to maintain uniform vegetation types. It was their way of coming back. Chapter 4 became a final stand. I rallied the neighbors, even those who had stayed silent before. They were tired too, tired of arbitrary power, of petty rules, of fear. We formed a coalition and filed a collective suit against the HOA. Months of hearings followed. The HOA crumbled under scrutiny. Their financial records showed misuse of community funds, unauthorized contractor deals, and false maintenance reports. The state stepped in, dissolving the HOA entirely. When it was over, I stood under those surviving trees as the first autumn breeze swept through. The farm was free again. The land felt alive in a way it hadn't in years. I could almost hear my grandfather's voice in the rustling branches, proud, relieved. The scars remained, the missing tree, the broken fence, the long nights of fear. But they were part of the story now, part of a victory that came not from revenge, but from resilience. I realized then that history isn't just preserved through roots and branches, it's preserved through the people who refuse to let it be erased. So, if you're watching this and you've ever dealt with an HOA that went too far, remember, you have more power than they want you to believe. Don't let them dictate your history, your home, or your peace. Stand tall like those old oaks and never back down. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who's fighting their own HOA battle. New stories like this one drop every week. Trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next.